Okay, in this one we're going to talk about the development of the field of evolutionary biology post-Darwin. So, how the field progressed after the initial Darwinian revolution, talking about advantageous traits called adaptations being naturally selected. So Darwin was putting forth ideas that were generally accepted in his time. Geologic time was found to be older than previously believed, and this gave rise to new understandings about the development of species. And a lot of these ideas of geologic time, like we talked about in one of the first ones, Darwin got these from a scientist called Lyell. Have a look for the slide. Yeah, Charles Lyell's Principles of Geology. So it gave us a better understanding about geologic time. Earth was a lot older than we previously thought, and the history of life therefore happened over a much larger time span. So that gives more time for evolution to occur. The difference between Darwin and others putting the pieces together about evolution is that Darwin had a lot of evidence from specimens he collected from his time on his expedition of the Beagle that proved his theory of evolution by natural selection. Darwin even produced a very rudimentary phylogenetic tree, shown here on the right with the famous quote, "I think," basically showing how different groups are related to one another. Now, Darwin's ideas on inheritance were a bit off compared to what we know today, because he believed traits were passed on via these things called gemmules, which he thought were cells from various parts of the body that would give rise to that region of the body in offspring. We now know that the traits are inherited through genes on chromosomes, with each chromosome having a different version of the gene called an allele. Darwin's ideas have been fused with Mendel's ideas to kind of produce our modern synthesis of evolutionary biology. And Mendel's ideas were not really rediscovered like the myth kind of suggests. They were known by a lot of scientists, and three big scientists cited Mendel at the same time to ensure that their competition didn't get credit for the discovery of Mendel's ideas. And Mendel's ideas were the principle of segregation, which is where homologous chromosomes are segregated in meiosis, an independent assortment where the separated homologous alleles are the separated homologous chromosomes, all the chromosomes are kind of inherited in gametes randomly, so it's kind of random recombination of alleles. So in humans, you're always going to have unless you have some kind of non-disjunction event, but you're usually always going to have one copy of chromosomes 1 to 23. But the point is that the versions of those 23 chromosomes that you're going to get, it's going to be random. So yeah. So there are two means of a trait being naturally selected in a population, and both are known to take place, but it depends what the trait is. So the first is gradualism, which argues that animals evolve incrementally in small steps, amplifying specific traits. For example, the gradual lengthening of giraffe necks, which I've shown on the top right. And then we have punctuated equilibrium, which argues that evolution occurs in singular leaps that drastically alter the phenotype, which I show on the bottom right. So punctuated equilibrium is kind of large changes to the phenotype tend to be immediate. If we're going to think about that in organisms, that would kind of be our usually homobox gene editing to produce radically different phenotypes. So an outdated view of evolution presumes that evolution has a driving force or will, and that traits emerge from the actions of organisms rather than their relevant alleles. For example, if a giraffe stretches its neck frequently, then the neck grows from use, and offspring will inherit longer necks. This, as I'm sure you're aware, is not possible, as acquired characteristics are not heritable, but ideas of this are changing slightly with the emergence of the field of epigenetics, where environmental stimuli, as well as kind of part of it is your own actions, because exercise and diet contribute to phenotype. So this theory that we just talked about here, where evolution has a will, is called Lamarckian evolution, and it's kind of discredited nowadays. But the field of epigenetics kind of makes it a bit relevant, but the idea that an organism has a kind of will to do these kind of things is irrelevant. Epigenetics is just going to cause certain genes to become transcriptionally repressed, or certain genes are not going to be transcriptionally repressed. So Correns, De Vries, and Samark Sejsneg were these three scientists responsible for all citing Mendel in their papers, so that their opponents didn't get the credit for the discovery of his ideas. But it should be noted that Mendel's works themselves suggest that he may not have been aware of what he was seeing, as his papers were translated by a scientist called William Bateson, who added some of his own ideas and interpretations to Mendel's work, and he may have kind of exaggerated the words that Mendel was using to describe what he was seeing. Nonetheless, Mendel was viewed as a kind of origin story for the emerging field of genetics, and even today these ideas of segregation, independent assortment, and dominance are strongly tied to how we study organisms' phenotypes, how we study the inheritance of those phenotypes, and how we understand changes in allele frequencies, because obviously segregation and independent assortment are important to inheritance, and the modern kind of definition for evolution is literally change in allele frequency over time. So all these ideas have been put together now to produce what we call the modern synthesis of evolutionary biology, which postulates that phenotype is the result of genotype and environment. So that's what we were saying before about epigenetics playing a role in phenotype. Genes pass intact through generations in discrete units called alleles, so different versions of a gene. Mutations generate the raw material for selection to act upon, because when a gene is mutated, it can alter a trait, and if that trait proves advantageous, then it becomes an adaptation that can be naturally selected through evolution. And evolution is the change in allele frequencies in populations over time, with populations being genetically variable, so producing different types of alleles, because obviously you need different types of allele for one allele to be advantageous and increase in frequency over time through natural selection. But the main takeaway is that change in allele frequency in populations over time is kind of the key idea if you're thinking of evolution. So think evolution, change in allele frequency over time. That is the modern synthesis. There is a kind of current ideas that we need a revised modern synthesis, because as we learn more about genetics, these ideas are becoming slightly less well fit